Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I think you're going to enjoy today's episode. I wonder if I would ever say I think you're not going to enjoy today's episode. Anyways, I'm talking with Rochelle today, and we had such a great conversation that I didn't take very many notes, which I usually take copious notes, but I was just enjoying the flow of the conversation so much. In this episode, we talk about the importance of self-compassion and radical acceptance, and that we really experience the world in a different way. And because of our wounding, we often feel like we don't fit in, and the importance of looking at the negative messages that we received and really identifying with the superpowers that we have so that we really can lead from the heart. And Amber talks about learning to reclaim yourself, which I really love. And she talks about struggling with anxiety and perfectionism and the two things that she figured out that have to do with perfectionism. And I'm going to let you listen to that in the episode. I asked her what her superpowers are, and I really love the things that she said. And again, I'm going to let you listen to those in the episode. But I think this is just really I just really love talking with Amber, and we were able to talk a little bit more about some of the questions that I asked my guests. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can really help me out by sharing it with other people. And if you can rate and review it in iTunes, there are instructions in the show notes. And you can also go to unapologeticallysensitive.com, click on this episode to get all the show notes and instructions on how to leave a review in iTunes. But let me tell you a little bit about Amber. Also, because I don't swear on this podcast, I'm going to call her company Bad Grass, but just take out the GR and you can figure out what it is. So Rochelle is an intuitive life coach and empowerment mentor for highly sensitive empaths, known as the sensitive Bad Grass. Amber's mission is to change the narrative in our culture around the word sensitive while guiding women own their superpower, cultivate fierce self-love, and take their place as the author of their own life story, thus unlocking the soul confidence needed to curate a purposeful and bad grass way of living, and spread their healing magic with a world that so desperately needs them. I think you're really going to enjoy this. And now, on to the show. Hey, Amber, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We again had a little technical difficulty before recording. I'll tell you, I have to say the thing about we're recording this in April. We're in California. We're on the third week of shelter in place. It has given me such an opportunity to practice flexibility without feeling bad and having excuses. I was thinking this morning, I think that's one of the positive outcomes of this global pandemic is really just learning to go with the flow, be flexible, and not feel so bad about things not working out well. Have you had any similar experience like that?
Absolutely. This is a new sort of, social landscape we're navigating here. And so I think we're all just kind of figuring it out as we go. And I think the more, grace we can have with ourselves and each other, the better.
Yeah. And what I'm thinking is, I think for me, one of the lessons that I'm getting from this is really bringing radical self-compassion. I was thinking, right now, it's so normal for everybody to be up and down on a daily basis and to be having big feelings and to having a more difficult time staying focused and accomplishing things in spite of the fact that things are slowing down. And I was thinking this morning, if I accepted this as the norm for all the time, I would feel so much better about my life because I often judge how I'm feeling because my perception is that everybody else is managing so much better than I am. And I'm the only one that pre-COVID has big feelings, and just it's a little bit more work for me to get through my day than how it appears that other people are managing it. Does that resonate for you at all?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think just being sensitive in general, we carry sort of an extra layer of that, emotional sensing. And then since we process things so much more deeply, it definitely can feel like it's harder for us, but I think it's so important not to compare ourselves to other people. And I think right now, everyone is really struggling with feeling overwhelmed and feeling anxious and kind of this sense of unknown. I was talking to one of my friends about this the other day, and I was like, I just think right now the most important thing for us globally is to be like, it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. We're all experiencing this in a different way. And so, having that self-compassion, but also having compassion for others and where they're at with what's going on right now.
I totally agree with you. And as much as I know not to compare, I think it's so subtle. If I go onto any of my social media accounts, how can you not see what the norma being posted is and not on some level internally think, they're all making dance videos and repainting and doing all this creating, and how come I can't? And I believe in not comparing, and it's so easy to fall into that without even recognizing that we're doing it.
Yeah, it really is. And self-compassion is so huge. Just, in general, I think that self-compassion gives us the freedom to go through life and just really, with a lot of acceptance that we're going to stumble and we're going to compare ourselves because it's natural. But when we can catch ourselves doing it and remind ourselves that, we're all having a different experience based off of our history and based off of our genetic makeup, then we can really be a little bit more forgiving with ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think this is really giving us an opportunity to really practice all of those things in a rapid PhD level, because so much of what's happening is happening so much more intensely and rapidly. Just even the mood and energy shifts on a day-to-day basis can really, it's like taking our life and putting it on speed.
Yeah. In what was already a very fast-paced society, honestly. And I think for us as sensitives, that's, I mean, I know for me personally, the kind of pace of society is already a little hard to keep up with and to manage. And so there's this interesting juxtaposition going on right now, because it's like, we're all trying to adapt to this new world, but at the same time, there's also, we're at home. So there's also kind of a more relaxed, calmer aspect to it at the same time. Are you feeling that?
Mm-hmm. I'm really appreciating the pace that's slowed down. As we've seen, there's less smog. The environment is getting a chance to recover. There's more time in nature. I'm seeing creative, generous, amazing ways that people are finding of serving people and connecting. So I think for me, it's really important to acknowledge the reality, the grief, the challenges that we're having, and to always be making a conscious effort to look at the things that are working, to be able to hold both of those things together, because I don't see things as being either or. And I would like to think that for most sensitives, that when we see posts that are about learn a new skill, be grateful, and it doesn't honor our depth of processing and our incredible capacity for empathy, and many of us are on empathy overload right now. For me, both of those things need to be held together in the same space.
Absolutely. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think, I've noticed that some people who maybe are not struggling as much right now, or maybe had something positive happen, or actually feeling guilty about having good feelings during this time. And so again, I just think that it's so imperative that we, let ourselves feel whatever we're feeling without that judgment, because we can be grateful and also be scared, and we can be in grief and also have hope. All of those things can exist at the same time. And, I think that maybe is one of the, it's such a tragedy what's going on right now. But if we can look at the silver lining, I think that universally we're kind of seeing that everything's sort of happening at once. There's the beautiful heroes in our healthcare system. And then there's, the tragic death and loss, and both those things are happening at the same time. And so we can be in gratitude and be in hope, and also let ourselves feel grief and fear and anxiety at the same time.
Yep. And honor that everybody's going to have a different way of responding. I was talking with a friend who's used to be a therapist. And what she was saying is that when she gets uncomfortable, she gets busy. That's what really works for her. And so for someone like me who tends to go into more of a freeze mode when there's a lot going on, for me, I need to push to keep some structure, make sure that I'm maintaining routine. So for me, I need to push to do a little bit more. For her, she may need to slow down a little bit, but to not judge that either one of us is doing it wrong. And I think in people's attempt to be helpful and post graphics about how we should be managing, I think however we're managing is okay. And if that means that we're showering or not showering, or we're snacking more, exercising or not exercising, whatever we're doing right now is what we need to do to survive. And if we have that little extra bit where we can push ourselves to either create more structure or to slow down because that's going to serve us, great. And if we can't, there's no way that we can screw up going through this right now. It's just really about having radical self-compassion.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. And radical self-acceptance and acceptance of everyone else and where they're at. And, I think just the more that we can catch ourselves when we fall into that place of self-judgment or judgment of others, and remind ourselves that like everybody's just managing right now. I mean, honestly, I think just getting up and going through your day right now makes you a warrior. We're all trying to figure it out as we go in what is something that, none of us have really experienced before in our lifetime. And so I think that, we need to remind ourselves that we're all doing the best that we can.
Yep. I realized yesterday that my new COVID dress code standard is if I put on earrings and a watch, I'm dressing up.
I love it. Yeah, I know. I was joking with my husband the other day and I was like, I don't think my skin has ever gotten to breathe so much without me doing my makeup every day.
That and not touching my face because I'm one of these people that lives with I love to rub my eyes and my face. And it's like, my face is getting a big old break right now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's jump into some of the typical questions that I asked. Do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do 100%.
And when did you find out you were an HSP?
So I always knew I was sensitive, but I never knew that it was actually a genetic trait until I was in my early 20s and I read Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person. And that's when I was like, oh my God, total brain explosion. That book made me feel so validated and it explained so much for me and really set me off on a journey of learning to accept my sensitivity and not just accept it, but love it. But that was the first time that I really had a set of vernacular to actually explain how I experienced the world. And that was a really powerful shift for me.
Yeah, I think many of us have this awareness of something's going on, and many of us have figured out how we're wired. But for me, when I found out about the trait and read about it, it just put such a different shift on my entire life that it's not that there was something wrong with me, but this is how I'm wired. It just was such a game changer, which is why I'm so passionate about continuing to talk about the strengths that we have as highly sensitive people, because I really want everybody to have that like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. And this comes with a bunch of strengths, some challenges, that's for sure. But being alive is not a beautiful, peaceful, perfect existence. So whether you're highly sensitive or not, being alive is going to come with challenges. We just do so much better when we understand about our trait and we're in environments that serve us more so than the non-highly sensitive person.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that once we know how we're wired and kind of understand what's going on in our brains, and it's so much, I mean, yes, like you said, there is a lot of challenges, but I think just knowing that that's the way that you're wired and knowing that there's nothing wrong with you makes us a lot more able to cope with those challenges and to start seeing the benefits of our trait. Because I know for me, before I really discovered that this was an actual genetic trait and started, diving in and kind of learning about it, I grew up thinking there was something very wrong with me because that was the message that was reflected back to me from the people around me, that I was too sensitive and I was too much and I took things too seriously and why wasn't I toughening up? And I'm sure everyone's nodding their head right now because this is what we hear. And unfortunately, that's really damaging, especially when you're a child. And I don't think it's necessarily other people's fault. I think it's a lack of understanding. I think that the greater population at large needs to be more educated about us because we make up 20% of the population roughly. But I think there's so much healing that comes when you realize that there's nothing wrong with you and that you are okay, and not only okay, but really actually exceptionally gifted. There's so many beautiful, beautiful things that come along with being highly sensitive. And once we can accept it and learn how to cope with some of the challenges, then we can really start to integrate into wow, this is actually really cool. And I feel grateful that I have this.
Absolutely. I just heard, I interviewed Elaine Friend last night, and she was saying that there are 1.6 billion HSPs. And I've heard Dr. Aaron say that we may make up as much as 30% of the population. But what I really believe is, as much as I would love for non-HSPs to understand about our trait, I really think that as we learn about our trait and we learn to embrace it and work through our wounding around the messages that we've gotten, that when somebody does say something to us like, oh, you're so sensitive, we go like, yeah, what does that bring up for you? So that we're not reactive, and it's a reflection back. And not to call my son out, who actually edits my episode. Thanks, Lovey. In the last week or two, he's made a comment about me and somebody else about being sensitive. And it's like, well, maybe you're not as sensitive as I am. Maybe we're wired differently. That I think that people that aren't sensitive just don't even have, that aren't as sensitive, I don't even think that they have an awareness that it's a gradation and that one isn't right or wrong. We're just wired differently. And if we can learn to understand and accept our differences, that's where I think the healing comes from. What do you think, Lovey?
Yeah, but it's true. It's the more that we as sensitives I love what you said, because I agree 100%. The more that we heal that wounding and are no longer in that place of apologizing for who we are, right? Because so often, I know for me growing up, I would be like, I'm sorry. Somebody said you're being too sensitive. Oh, I'm so sorry. Or, why are you overreacting? Oh, you're right. It's my fault. I'm very much in that, yes, you're right. It's my fault. I'm going to apologize for this, but rather to shift into like, no, like I'm not going to apologize for the truth of who I am. And I think the more that we as a group start to stand in that space of, and I love how you said, what does that bring up for you? Because it makes it more of a conversation, and that causes a ripple effect, because when one highly sensitive person stops apologizing for who they are, then that sort of, gives permission to another highly sensitive person to stop apologizing for who they are. And then it sort of spreads from there. And I think that as a population of HSPs, the more that we accept ourselves, the more that we will be accepted.
Absolutely. And just because I've done my work doesn't mean that those things don't get activated for me. I struggle with the wound of too much and not enough. I have an organization that I interact with, and I sent them something, and I said to the person via email, like, I have a feeling that I'm seen as a pain in that rhymes with grass. Because instead of the regular person responding to me, they had this person respond to me. And then she responded and didn't say anything. And so when I responded back, I said, I noticed you didn't respond. I'm okay with that. And then she said, no, I'm just really busy. But, I can't tell you how many of my clients and friends, and I have this too, of like, I'm that person. Because on the healthy side, I will question what doesn't feel right. I can be very detail oriented. And on the other side of that, I can be a little bit rigid about rules and having ideas of how I think people should respond. And I probably can go a little bit over the line on that. And I just have to own that. So I just, for the listener, I don't want to give the impression that you do your work and that you never struggle with whatever your wounding is. For me, it still comes up. Sometimes I act from it. For the most part, I don't, but it's a very imperfect human process.
Yeah, definitely. We're never completely healed, right? This life is a journey. And so I think the most important thing is awareness, having awareness of your wounding, so that when it does come up, you can be like, oh, that's right. Like, I see you, old friend, and have that self-compassion for yourself, that you are a human being and that is part of the human experience, and that we all have, our strengths and our, not so strengths. And so I think just really like acceptance and awareness are, I think two of the most powerful things that we can practice.
Absolutely. Just being able to observe my reactions, observe my thought process, and go like, isn't that interesting? I mean, that's how we gather information. That's really what mindfulness is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. Isn't that interesting? Because it takes it out of right or wrong. It takes it out of the judgment of yourself, and just like, wow, look at that. That's really interesting. Like, what does that tell me about myself? What is that, how do I feel about that? It's more of I always say to my clients, try and, employ curiosity, not judgment.
Mm-hmm.
and then bring in that heavy dose of self-compassion, because that really helps us to kind of have more flow through life and allow ourselves to grow and heal in our own time.
Yeah, and there's something that happens in the brain. I've heard Daniel Amen talk about this, that when we get curious instead of getting furious, we use a different part of the brain. And so that having that genuine curiosity, and as HSPs, we tend to be really curious. And I know that I've had this narrative in my head that I'm nosy because I just am so curious, and it's felt intrusive to people. So I need to be mindful of that. And I also see how I often don't engage as much as I want to because that fear of being intrusive. But like, I just am fascinated by certain things. Are you?
Yes, yes. I'm fascinated by humans in general. I
Mm-hmm.
love getting to know people. I love, I think most HSPs were not really into small talk, but I always say like, I always swim in the deep end. Like I want to know people for who they really are. I love hearing people's stories, and, yeah. And I think part of the reason too why we're naturally curious is because I always talk about them as like these little energetic like antennae, sort of metaphorically, where we're taking in so much information from the world around us, and we want to know. And one of the things that I talk to my clients about too is, with having that sort of natural inclination to be so curious and outwardly focused, it's really important for us also to learn how to turn those antennae back in and tune into our own frequency and know what's
Mm-hmm.
going on the inside with us as well.
Absolutely. And Dr. Aaron talks about, because of our depth of processing, we're really great at taking in pieces of information and making new ways of seeing information because we notice so many details. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, and that's part of what gives us, we can be very visionary and extremely creative, because we are looking at all those details in a different way and seeing things in a new way. And we really do see and experience the world in a different way than people that don't have this genetic trait. And so that's really, really cool, because it can allow us to offer different perspectives and maybe see things that other people might not notice. And that in and of itself is a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just taking notes here. It's interesting when I'm having a casual conversation, I just don't take notes, and I'm like, oh, I better start writing down something. What do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
That's a really good question. It doesn't, I see it as kind of neutral. I'm not the biggest fan of labels, aside from the fact that it gives us a point of mutual understanding. I think it describes us well. We are highly sensitive. I get a lot of questions, because I use the word empath a lot in my work as well. And so I do get a lot of questions about, what do I think is the difference between being highly sensitive and being an empath? And really, there are some differences, but I personally feel like the point really is how you experience the world and what that means for you personally. Whatever you want to call yourself, if you even want to call yourself something, fine. But it's more about like learning about yourself and learning about how you navigate the world and how you can do that in a way that best supports your unique nature. But what I do like about having the term empath or having the term highly sensitive person is that we can use that to find a way to, find other people that are like us and that we can relate to. And so we feel like we're a part of something, because I think one of the biggest sources of wounding for us has been this feeling that we don't fit in and that we don't belong. And one of our basic needs as human beings is to have that sense of belonging. And so when we kind of find our tribe, our people that just get us, it's really healing in that sense to that wounding of I don't fit anywhere or I don't belong here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there another term that you wish were used?
I always like to talk about sensitivity as a superpower, and I know I'm not alone in that. I use the term super sensitive a lot to kind of tie that back into the superpower, because I really think about it as, there's certain things in life, in humanity, that we see as a society as like, yes, that's a gift. Like if you're very good at sports, right? Or if you're incredibly skilled at art, or if you are like an amazing therapist or whatever it is, but those are like recognized. Okay, yeah, like if there's like a little kid that is showing a lot of promise in basketball, like he or she is probably gonna, depending on their personal experiences, but they're probably going to get like fostered by the coach. They might go to special camps. Like they're going to like have people supporting them in growing that skill. And so I sort of feel like as sensitives, it's the same thing. We're just really naturally gifted at empathy and compassion and perception. And it's just that hasn't been really widely recognized as one of those things that's like, oh, you're really gifted in that way. But what if it was? Like, what if people started to see it that way, not just us as sensitives, but the world at large? What kind of a difference would that make if sensitive children were seen as like, oh, you're gifted in that area. I'm going to help you to grow that skill. And it's going to be, honored. And if we grew up in that way, what a difference would that make in how we as sensitives would feel empowered to be leaders in this world? And I think that that's really important. So when it comes to labeling, I just think that I like the idea of telling, my audience and my people that, they really are gifted and that they do have a superpower, to kind of add that on.
Yeah. And I think for kids, that when kids have at least one adult in their lives, and it doesn't even have to be a parent, who really can honor the child's feelings and model how to embrace those feelings, I think it just really creates a sense of resilience, because it's really about knowing that how we show up in the world is really okay, and having someone else who can help model how to embrace big feels. I think that's part of what builds resiliency and develops that sense of strength, and that we have a gift.
For sure. Yeah. It makes such a big difference for a child to have, a model like that, and to not only to help them learn how to, like you said, navigate all the big feelings, and to know that there's nothing wrong with them for having those big feelings, but also to help them see that their trait, really it is a gift to the world. And so I think those two parts are so, so important to be able to build that resilience, but also to have that self-esteem and confidence and sense of, like mattering in the world and belonging in the world, and letting yourself be who you are rather than that. I think a lot of us sensitives grow up very much censoring ourselves constantly because we're afraid of the reaction that we might get or what people might think of us. And in that self-censoring, we're really hiding some really cool parts of ourselves.
In the online courses it just recently finished, there was a member who was saying that their partner was very good at accomplishing tasks. They're good at doing, and this was most likely the non-HSP. And so the HSP was comparing themselves to their partner. And what the group came up with was this visual that of like check boxes for their partner. And for them, it was just a big heart. And it's not that we can't get things done. It's not that we don't make good leaders, because we do, but because so much of how we're driven is through heart-centered actions, and that we're often the emotional glue that holds things together, and we bring empathy, and we're great listeners, which is why we make such great leaders, and we can certainly accomplish just as well as the non-HSPs. But I think because for many of us, we come from that heart-centered approach, it's less tangible. It's easy to show you a list of things that I did today, but when I show up in the world leading with my heart, the way that I make connections is not as tangible and as easy to recognize and notice, but those emotional connections are so powerful and so healing.
Yes. Oh gosh. I love the way that you put that, because that's exactly it. It's not always as easy to put in words or have a concise, like, yes, this is it. But that emotional connection and that heart-centered way of going through life is so needed. I mean, if we took that away, what would happen to our world, right? So I really, really love the way you put that, because it doesn't have to be tangible to be important.
Right. But it makes it harder because, again, we go on social media and there's nothing that says like, I sat and listened and connected to somebody today. I listened to my child and they felt really heard and seen. That those are harder skills to observe, to talk about, and they're so important. And how can we not compare when we're looking at people that are accomplishing and doing, but when we've got, I don't know if they're called soft skills or not, but we have these really powerful skills that are not as easy to measure or to see, but they're so powerful.
Yeah. And I think the more that we own that for ourselves and in ourselves, and the more that we allow ourselves to feel good about our skills, even though it's not as straightforward to explain them maybe as it is with some other stuff. But I just think it's so important that we as a population of sensitives are seeing that for ourselves and valuing that in ourselves, because that is going to help us to sort of reflect that back to the rest of the world. We can talk about those things as powerful because they are. And I actually think that what's going on in the world right now, again, as terrible as it is in so many ways, what we really need right now, as you know, is that emotional connection and being there for each other and supporting each other and helping people through their grief. And like, our skill set is needed more than ever right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Amber, what are some challenges that you experience as a highly sensitive person?
Oh gosh. For me, anxiety is really huge for me. That also does run in my family, but so I kind of have the double whammy of, the genetic family background of anxiety, but then also just sort of the overwhelming anxiety that comes from being a highly sensitive person. I definitely have a lot of tools to cope with that now, but it's still something that, is hard on a day-to-day basis. And I think another one for me that was really sort of a huge theme across my life was perfectionism, because I sort of use that, and I think a lot of people listening will probably understand, as a way to feel in control. Because when the world is so loud and overwhelming and noisy, and we feel like we don't fit in and we don't belong, it can lead us to want to grasp onto something and hold on to something. And I think for me growing up anyways, that perfectionism was, it served several needs for me. One was to prove to the world that I was enough, right? So if I was doing everything quote unquote perfectly, that I felt like I was making up for this supposed flaw that I had. But it also gave me a sense of control and kind of a way to measure like checks and balances of like, am I doing good enough? Because I was always worried about that. And that sort of got very ingrained in me. And so as I got older and really started doing a lot of healing work, healing my childhood trauma and learning to love my sensitivity and learning to really love and accept myself, I had to really take a hard look at that and how that was playing out in my life. And so, I've done a lot of work there, but like you said, things come back up. And so, I was actually talking with a friend the other day about how when I started my online business, I started noticing all of these things kind of like rearing their ugly head again. And I was like, I thought I healed that. Like, where's this coming from again?
Yeah, that idea that if we heal one area, that's it for forever.
Yeah. Nope.
Bad news. Yeah.
So that was really, an eye opener for me too, that these things that we struggle with, like they'll show up in different ways and at different levels. And it really isn't about like having something, completely fixed, quote unquote, and tied up in a pretty little bow. It's more about, like I said before, having that awareness so that you notice when things come up. Because now, for example, with the perfectionism, I'll catch myself and be like, oh gosh, I'm falling back into that place. I wonder what's triggering this for me. And I can take a look at that from that curious aspect, rather than being like, oh my gosh, I'm failing. I thought I fixed this already. So I think that's really important for us as HSPs to remember too, with the challenges that we have, is that we're always going to be learning more ways to adapt and more ways to deal with those. They might always be present for us at different levels in our life, but as long as we have that awareness and we continue to build coping skills, that's how we really get through. It's not about being perfect and fixed, because you don't need to be fixed. Everyone has challenges.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. An area that I've noticed my perfectionism that comes up isn't when I craft. And I think it's the depth of processing, trying to decide on a project and then really being very critical of my skills not being meticulous. And it really ends up inhibiting me and inhibiting my creative process, because I get so overwhelmed. And with this pandemic that we're having, I decided to sew some masks, and I've found that it gives me enough structure that I don't have to decide on, I pick out the fabric and everything else is pretty much pre-designated. I do find like I want my seams to be perfect. And then I feel like I'm being sloppy and I want to do the fun part, the sewing. I don't want to do the cutting. And I don't like when I make a mistake and I have to rethread. So really trying to embrace that as being part of the process, that it's just not the sewing part. But it's just been interesting to observe how that perfectionism can even show up in something like making masks. And it's really given me some structure, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, and a way to kind of keep my mind occupied. I've also been listening to music from the 70s that I listened to in my bedroom in high school. So I'm having that really nostalgic, comforting, I loved being in my room as a teenager and listening to music that just really filled me up. So it's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but there we go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the crafting thing too, because I'm a huge crafter myself. I love to make costumes. That's just one of my hobbies. And my husband makes films, independent films. So I help him out on set, but I've noticed that too. And I think because we're so tuned into detail, that can contribute to us being like, everything has to be perfect because we notice if something's not. We notice that immediately. The other thing that I've seen come up when I'm, making my costumes or doing a crafty thing is that I have so many ideas and I can see it play out in so many different ways. And, we struggle with making decisions as sensitives. And I think that is partially because we don't trust ourselves unless we've done the work to be able to, but also that we can see so many different opportunities that it's hard to just like nail it down to one.
And my favorite motto is done is better than perfect.
I have that framed on my wall. I do. That's so funny because otherwise we just get ourselves in this, kind of spinning in circles and never really get somewhere. And I think it's one of those things where, if I use the costume example, it's like I get better and better every single time. So it's not if I stopped myself from creating because it wasn't the vision that I saw in my head or because, all the beads weren't straight or my whatever, I would never be able to grow and get better and let myself learn. So, it's challenging to set that perfectionism aside, but it's also so freeing. So freeing.
I often will tell my clients, let's lower the bar, just get it done. And I remember when my son had his first semester in college, he'd put off writing a paper and it was the night before and there was a 5-page paper due, and said no mother ever to her son, I want you to write the worst paper that you can, because I just wanted him to get it done. And often that sense of we have these ideas of how it should be, and it doesn't allow us room to just be where we're at in the moment. And quite often our perception of terrible kind of meets adequate for society's standards, but because the bar is so high and we feel like if we can't make that mark, we don't even want to try. So being able to give ourselves permission to do something really poorly often gets the momentum going, and what we end up producing is good enough, if not even better than average.
That's such a good way to look at it. It really is. And I had to really accept that when I actually studied art in college. And so, it was to be able to complete my school assignments. I had to, at certain points, just be like, well, I'm just going to do this. And even if it's horrible, I'm just going to do it. But it never was horrible. It may not have been what I wanted it to be, but then you put it in front of somebody else and get a completely different perspective on it. And, one of my favorite books is Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection, because it really does remind us that, we might feel this sense of accomplishment with this perfectionism thing, or it gives us this false sense of control or whatever it is, whatever way it's serving you. Getting rid of it, like the gifts of like letting yourself be imperfect, are so much bigger and so much greater, because to have that freedom to be yourself, to have that freedom to practice, to make mistakes, to learn from your mistakes, to try, and to just kind of like, it's like taking a big deep breath and just like take that weight off of yourself and just let yourself be. It's huge. Yeah. And now that I've seen that other side, I would way rather live over here. And perfectionism still comes up for me from time to time, but I remind myself of that. I remind myself of how it felt when I was living in that space where I had such rigid rules for myself, and how it feels now to just kind of let myself be a little bit more relaxed in life.
Absolutely. What are some of your superpowers?
Oh, superpowers. Yes. I love talking about this. So I think that empathy in and of itself is a huge superpower. I mean, it's like if you think about the fact that we can tune into the energy in a room and we can tap into like feeling what other people are feeling, that's so cool. It really is. It's so cool. And I don't know if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy too.
I haven't.
But there's a character in there named Mantis, and her superpower is that she's an empath. And I was so thrilled when I saw that like represented in pop culture in that way, because it's a really, really cool gift. And I think too, our ability to perceive at such a deep level and to notice those little details is super cool. I mean, honestly, I think I've had people ask me before, when I talk about having the superpower, oh, so you think that sensitives or highly sensitives are better than other people? And I'm like, no, I think everybody has their superpowers. Honestly, everybody has their gifts. It's just that this is ours. And as a group, we have historically gotten really down on ourselves and felt like there was something wrong with us. And so I think claiming that and owning that as a superpower is extra important for us, because it reminds us that no, we actually do have a gift. It's not about better than or worse than or less than. It's just about everybody universally seeing and loving and fostering their own gifts. When I talk about it in terms of sensitivity, it's just that same thing, that like, this is our superpower, is that depth of feeling and processing. And like you said earlier, those emotional bonds that we can form. And really, for me personally, I feel like being a healer is my greatest superpower, just my capacity to really use my powers of intuition and seeing and hearing people at that deeper level to foster healing. That's my greatest gift in life.
Absolutely. And I think for many of us that have received so many messages about, you worry too much, you think too much. How come you can't take a joke? You need to get thicker skin. And this is probably true for other populations. So my focus is HSP. So that's what I'm going to focus on. I think that's why it's so important for us to really identify all the negative messages that we've received and internalized and see what the corresponding strengths are. Because I still have that. If I go to a restaurant and I need to order something special, there is still that part of like, I know I'm kind of your problem person to order because I need something special. And it's really okay for me to take care of myself and my health needs, and to really be able to come in for myself with an empowering statement about why it's okay for me to need something different from everybody else. And that's where our work comes in. And I've seen such amazing transformation when I run the online courses and people start seeing what their strengths are and bringing that into their lives, and how empowering it can be because of these ongoing negative cultural messages about, don't cry, don't be so sensitive. I mean, I see it all the time. Do you?
Yeah. It's the most empowering journey to kind of like reclaim that stuff, just like you said, of looking at those negative messages that you've gotten, but then looking at the flip side of that. Okay, maybe this person thinks that I'm being to this or to that or whatever, but how is that a good thing? How can I reframe that for myself? And, to really start to like, I feel like when we start to train our brains to look for the good in our sensitivity rather than the negative, it's such a powerful shift. Like, and I always say when people give that message of like, oh, you need to toughen up, I'm like, I'm sorry, this world has enough tough guys. Tough is not the same as strong. We are very, very strong as sensitives. We are extremely strong. We carry so much emotional weight, and we still get up and go through our day and do the things that everybody else does. And so this concept that we're somehow weak, I think is absolutely ridiculous. I think that we are extra strong. And I think that it's really important for us to see the strength in how we are, not strength as it might be defined by somebody else, because the more that we can love the thin skin that we're in and accept that and be like, I don't need to be tough because I have this inner strength. I think being vulnerable, talking about your emotions, being authentic, wearing your heart on your sleeve, like that's the stuff that takes real strength. This concept of being tough and acting like things don't matter. And, that's not healthy. honestly, being able to talk about our emotions openly and freely and deal with them and just be who we are and let ourselves be vulnerable, like that is healthy. That is strength. And so that reframing is so important.
Absolutely. I worked in a job for 9 years, and I know that my boss saw my vulnerability as a weakness. And what I know is it takes so much freaking courage to be vulnerable and to share what's going on and to feel our feelings, that's really where strength and healing comes from. And that's one of the narratives that I would love to shift around sensitivity. And we often have this fear that if we feel our feelings or something terrible happens, that we're not going to be able to manage it. And the truth is, we feel things so deeply. We've already experienced so much depth in our feelings. We've probably already experienced so much that if something else were to happen, would we choose it? Would it be fun? No. Do we have the capacity and ability to manage? Absolutely. And it's such an amazing strength. It's just not always viewed as a strength. So that's why we need to do our work and talk about why having deep feelings and lots of empathy and deep processing really is amazing. And we're incredibly strong, resilient people.
Yes, yes. And a gift to this world, and needed, really needed in this world. And HSP aside, in general, everybody, I think, in society needs to feel more okay about feeling their feelings and talking about their feelings. Like that's just such a healthier way of life. I think that if that was more, globally accepted, like anxiety would go down, depression would go down, illness would go down, like so many things. And so just by us being who we are and not apologizing for that, we are already contributing to the healing of the world.
Mm-hmm. And feelings are just energy. So it's just energy that moves through us. And if we don't experience and we block it down, that energy just builds up. And I can't tell you how many people I work with that are afraid to be embarrassed of showing their emotions. But what happens is they put a cap on it and then they lose it. And then they do end up feeling embarrassed because it's kind of like a pressure cooker. All of a sudden they blow and then they feel really embarrassed. And had they let off that little bit of steam at a time when it came up, those feelings wouldn't have built up. This isn't true for everybody, but for many people, we're so afraid of expressing our emotions, but then they just bottle up and then we lose it. And then we really often do create a sense of embarrassment because had we let it out a little bit at a time, the pressure wouldn't have built up. Let me say that a third time.
No, but that's a really important point because it's true. And a lot of my clients will say to me, I'm so reactive. I want to work on that. I don't want to be so reactive. And that's exactly what I will offer back to them is that, that it's not that you as a person are reactive. It's that, you have bottled this stuff up so much so that when it does come out, it comes out in a really big way. And that can be seen as overreacting, but it really is because you have that pressure cooker built up. And when we learn that our feelings are not actually that scary, yes, they're not always pleasant, but that they're not actually that scary and they're actually here to teach us something, and if we allow them, they're going to move through us so much quicker and dissipate so much quicker, then that really gives you the ability to start making friends with your feelings and to start allowing them as they come. And like you said, like letting that steam out a little bit at a time. And then naturally that, reactive part will die down because you're processing in a more healthy way and a more natural way. And so then when something does happen, it's not going to knock you off your center so much.
Right. Amber, I'm looking at time and I know that you have a limited time, so I want to be respectful. Is there anything about being an HSP that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to cover really briefly?
I think we covered some really, really good stuff here. And I think just to anyone who's listening and, just know that like, you're not alone. The challenges are normal. There are ways to cope with them and skills that you can learn to help make it easier to thrive in this world as a highly sensitive. But really, honestly, the most important thing that I can say to you out there is like, you're so needed and you're so important and you're so gifted, and don't give up on yourself and don't try and change yourself, because just as you are is a true superpower and a true gift to this world.
I love that. Tell us about any projects that you're working on and where people can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me. My website is amberrochelle.com. All the social medias, I'm at Miss Amber Rochelle, MS, even though I'm married now. Had that before that. I have a really beautiful 6-month mentorship program that I have running. And then I'm also teaching monthly classes right now, which is a really nice way to kind of dip your toe into this work if you're not ready to fully commit. I also have a lot of really great free content out there. I just love to connect with people. So if this has resonated with you, please reach out to me and I'd love to have a conversation.
This has been fun. I want to do it again.
Me too.
An hour just is not enough time. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Amber. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I'm curious to know what you thought of that episode. What I was thinking when we were recording, there were a couple of things, and I don't remember what one of them was, but if you find that you're struggling with seeing what your strengths are, feeling like you're still not really okay with being a highly sensitive person, you struggle when people make comments about, what could be our perceived shortcomings, those are great reasons to reach out for either some coaching. I offer the online HSP course and I do individual online coaching globally. If you want to find information, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's a tab for the HSP online groups and also to work with me individually. I just think that we really are the emotional glue that keeps things together. We really do lead from the heart. And when we do our own work, it's not that we can't make amazing changes if we haven't done our own work, but it just helps us really show up in a way that can be so empowering. And we have so many strengths to offer the world. If you go to my website, there are links to the closed Facebook group that I have. I do a monthly meetup. Right now, we're doing it online due to COVID. That may end up being back in person in San Diego, depending on when this episode airs. But you can find all my social media links on my website. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a listener. Times right now are stressful and we have the ability to do so much healing right now. And there are so many gifts that are coming out of this and challenges. I'm not saying it's one or the other, it's both. But I'm just really appreciate each and every one of you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.